Hello everyone, my name is Lisa. Thank you for watching this talk tonight. I'm going to be talking about my student dissertation project that I've finished this year. I studied conservation and ecosystem management at Newcastle University, and my project worked with some of the arctic-alpine flora in Upper Teesdale. I don't know if many of you know Upper Teesdale, but it's well known for its spring gentian, which is this blue flower here, as well as other habitats and flora. For my project, I got some data from John O'Reilly, and some of you might know John O'Reilly, and he also did a talk for the Natural History Society in February. So if some of you haven't seen that talk, it's worth watching because it also gives a lot of information about the flora in Upper Teesdale itself. The first thing I'm going to talk about is just a quick summary of my project. Then I speak about the habitat and the flora itself, and then I go back to the project and what my findings were from my own project. So when I started my master, I was given some data from John O'Reilly and Margaret Bradshaw. So John O'Reilly and Margaret Bradshaw both did some presence-absence surveys of 19 arctic-alpine plants in Upper Teesdale. And so Margaret Bradshaw is very passionate about the flora, and she studied it for a very long time. So in the 70s, she did quite a large survey of 19 plants, and she also founded the Teesdale Special Flora Trust recently. And John O'Reilly sort of repeated her survey in the last 4 years. And now, having both of those people's data, you can compare them. And this is the table here on the right. You can see, unfortunately, after comparing the data, there's a very large decline in population extent for most of the species visible. Some species have declined 98%, and the average is 54%. So it's very concerning. And this is decline in population extent. So as I said before, they both did presence-absence surveys. That means you look at a square and write down if you find a species or not, but we don't know about the population size. So we don't know how many plants were found per square. And just to add to this, in the middle here, I put a photo and you can see this is for one of those species. It's called Mountain Everlasting. And all those yellow squares show where the survey took place. And the orange squares show where the plant was found in the 70s, and the black dots show where the plant was found in the last 4 years. So unfortunately, you can see that the plant is occurring in a lot less squares than it used to be. And that's a very worrying picture. And if you look then on the table, we can see there's an 84% decline. So this is the data that I was given at the start. And John told me that both of them used slightly different methods. And therefore, he wanted to look into the accuracy of his survey. He wanted to know if maybe some of the results might be due to a different method being used. And especially because the decline is so big, we want to make sure that the results are accurately recorded. And that's basically what I did for my project. I looked into the accuracy of the survey. But before I talk about my project itself, I'm going to just give you now a quick summary of Upper Teesdale itself and the flora. So where is Upper Teesdale? We are in southwest County Durham. If you look on the top left, the red dot, this is where Upper Teesdale is, and yeah, southwest County Durham or North Pennines, and it's part of the Moorhouse National Nature Reserve. And the photo on the bottom right shows a Google image, and you can see this yellow area, and this is where most of the Arctic alpine flora lives nowadays. You may also notice this quite large reservoir here on the left. And this is called Cow Green Reservoir, and it's a reservoir that flooded the River Tees in the 70s. So we are not too far here from the source of the River Tees, and it got flooded, and that unfortunately also flooded quite a lot of the previous extent of the Arctic alpine flora. So they would have been growing along here as well. But yeah, as I said, they got flooded, but nowadays the flora still exists around here. And this is at the bottom of Widdybank Fell. There's another fell nearby called Cronkly Fell, but this project focused on the flora here. So on Cronkly Fell, the plants also live, but this project focused on the plants on Widdybank Fell. Okay, so what's so special about Upper Teesdale then? It inhabits a lot of different habitats. So there are dwarf shreep heath, there's blanket bog, there's loads of different types of grasslands. And the most interesting for this project is something called sugar limestone. And sugar limestone got its name because of the consistency, so it looks like sugar. If you look on the bottom photo here, or also on the top one, you can see it's quite crumbly, crystalline structure, and that's why it's called sugar limestone. And how it got there is that 295 million years ago, hot magma erupted through the earth and heated the surrounding limestone. So it's metamorphism, and the heat caused the limestone to change consistency, and that's why it now sort of resembles a sugar-like consistency. And it has a very thin soil over top, and is usually quite an open vegetation, which is important because many of the plants are shade intolerant and they cannot be shaded out by grasses, for example, and need good sunlight. And the plants for the projects that I looked at are mainly living on either slightly drier places or on wetter places like flushes and mountain streams. So I've got two examples here. On the left you can see a more open, drier area. Some of the plants also live in these slightly denser grasslands. Or here's a picture of a gravelly flush in the middle here, and the plants may grow on the sides or right in the middle of the flush. Okay, so as I said, the studies looked at 19 species, and the list here on the left shows all the different plants. And most of them are actually from a different plant family, which I think is quite interesting because it highlights the diversity of Upper Teesdale. And Upper Teesdale is interesting because it is in the middle of the UK, kind of. So you have it's kind of in the middle between north and south, and also in the middle between east and west. And a lot of the plants have their either most northerly or most southerly distribution in Upper Teesdale. So they may grow in Scotland and then up down to Upper Teesdale, and then it sort of stops all the other way around. And I'm going to be talking about 8 plants because I don't have enough time to talk about all 19. So I'm going to give you, they're not necessarily the most important. I've just used some that I've found frequently or that are particularly interesting. So the most obvious is the spring gentian, this beautiful blue flower on the left here. It flowers in May. So when I did my project in July, it wasn't in flower. So I had to look for the leaf rosettes, which are this in the middle. Here's the plant, and you can see it's sort of cross-shaped and quite bright green. So it's obvious enough to find them, even if they don't have a flower. And it likes open grasslands. And you can see on the distribution map here, it has a hotspot in Upper Teesdale and also seems to occur in Western Ireland. The next plant is the bird's eye primrose. It also flowers in May, and when I went, I had to again just look for the leaves. So you can see here on the right, they are green, quite bright green again, and the undersides are white, and then the edges are crinkly, so they're slightly folded over, which makes it distinct enough to identify. It likes slightly damper areas, and the distribution is also a bit wider than the spring gentian, so you have a wider area around Upper Teesdale into Cumbria as well, and a bit further south. The next one is the Teesdale violet. It is not just living in Teesdale despite the name, also abroad, but it seems to occur sort of central UK again. It's just another plant that flowers early in the year, and the leaves are still distinct because they're shovel-like. So the edges fold up a bit like a shovel, which you may make out here where my cursor is, that the edges are folded in. And this plant likes calcareous turf. And the next one is the hoary whitlow grass, a plant that likes to live on rocks, scree areas, or limestone pavement. When I found it in my survey, I did find it on a rocky area on a little cliff. And it's this plant here in the middle, so it has quite a dense little rosette of leaves and then the white petals. The plant you can see also lives quite a bit in Scotland, and then Upper Teesdale, and then further south a bit as well. It's very rare now, so I only found one in my whole project. And these are the last four that I want to quickly talk about. The yellow mountain saxifrage is a plant that's quite obvious to find, so I didn't have a problem finding them, usually along gravelly flushes or little mountain streams, and the petals are yellow, and if you look closely you might be able to see that there are little red dots on the petals. And those three plants here, unfortunately I didn't find any of them in flower. The dwarf milkwort is very rare now, didn't find many at all, and the alpine meadow and the mountain everlasting, I found them hard to see when the vegetation around them was quite dense, so I had to be quite close to the ground and ideally part away some of the grass on the top to be able to see it. But it still stinks, so the alpine meadow is this plant here, or you can see some leaves here, and the mountain everlasting is here. So once you got your eye on, you can still identify them easily. And the mountain everlasting is quite woolly, so it has woolly hairs on the top and on the back as well, and is white underneath. Okay, so back to the project. As I said before, I looked at data from two different periods, one from the 70s and one from the last 4 years. And in the 70s, the species presence will have been recorded on paper maps. It was potentially a slower survey done by multiple surveyors. And in the last 4 years, a grid-based mapping approach was used. So every 10 meter by 10 meter square was looked at for the 19 species. The approach was faster, and it was usually done by John O'Reilly, but sometimes by 2 other people as well. And the question was, can we assume that both surveyors recorded in the same way to enable a simple comparison? Could some plants have been missed due to a different method being used? And were there detectability issues? So we wanted to know if maybe because the method was faster, some species might have not been found in the last 4 years, and also we also wanted to look into why some species might have been missed more than others. So if a plant is quite distinct, like for example the saxifrage, it seems sort of less likely that one will have been missed, whereas other plants like the mountain everlasting, especially when it's not in flower, might have been easier missed, and also the surrounding vegetation might have played a role. So those were the questions that I looked into, and I wanted to find out a bit more. And the main thing I did is that I did my own little sample survey. So I went to Upper Teesdale and I recorded the plants that I could find on 10 meter by 10 meter squares. So I chose squares where both the survey in the 70s and the survey from the last 4 years looked at. And I also did a faster and a slower method. So my faster method was a 10-minute walk over of each square. And the slower method was that I took as long as I needed until I felt I had looked everywhere. And I got plant training, ID training by John and by Helen Adamson. Helen Adamson was my supervisor for the project, so you can see her down here enjoying some plant ID. And after I've received the training, I realized that for me, I had to exclude 2 plants because I found it too difficult to identify them in the time that I had. Okay, so now to my results. In 7 cases, I found a species that had not been recorded in the last 4 years, but that had been recorded in the 70s. So therefore, I assumed that it had been missed. And 6 out of these 7 cases, I found that species with a slower method that I used. And this is my spreadsheet here on the left. So you can see that, for example, in the first square, I found the same as what was found in the last 4 years, but then I also found a mountain everlasting that had been recorded in the 70s. So you can so then I could see that there were some species missed, but interestingly, it was only 4. So it was 7 cases, but all of these 7 cases were only made about 4 species. And those were the mountain everlasting, the hoary whitlow grass, the northern bedstraw, and the alpine meadow rue. So only those 4 seems to show some discrepancy. For all the other plants, I had the same as what was found in the last 4 years. And when I did some statistics on it, it showed that even though I found some species that were missed, there was not a significant difference in the 10 squares between my survey and the survey from the last 4 years. But both of us found significantly less than what was found in the 70s, which highlights the decline since the 70s. My overall limitation, I would say, is that I only surveyed 10 squares, which is quite a small sample size, and that has possibly led to a low statistical power. And I also didn't choose my squares randomly. I chose them with a bias. So that would be some improvement for the future, to choose a larger sample size and the squares randomly. Since then, John has looked into, he's made the spreadsheet and he's looked into some patterns that evolved. And he noticed that there are some species that seem to have been detected easier with a slower method than a faster method. So he treated the survey from the 70s and my slower survey as the 2 slow surveys. And then he treated his survey and my faster survey as a fast survey. So we essentially have 2 fast and 2 slow surveys. And the pattern is that if you look at the darker green color here, you see that these species all seem to have been picked up easier with a slower method. So the longer time you spend, you find them a bit better. And this brings us back to detectability issues. So those 4 here, there is some detectability issues, potentially, for example, if they're not very distinct. If there's just a small leaf rosette and it's overgrown by surrounding vegetation, then it's definitely harder to see, and if you spend more time, you're more likely to find a species. And this is kind of what he's looking into now. Okay, so what does this all mean? I'll talk about my conclusion of the whole project. We found some detectability issues for some plants, and even though my results weren't significant, a larger unbiased study would be worthwhile to bring more clarity for those species. And for all the other species, the concerning decline is unfortunately true. And I think it's very likely that also those with detectability issues, that there is definitely a decline. I think that's highly likely. So that's very worrying, and we need urgent conservation action in this area. That's great if we want to protect the species. And it was great to hear that the trust from Margaret Bradshaw received a grant this year, and so further conservation action should be able to be taken. And I want to say thank you to John and Margaret for their help and ideas and all the data that they've provided me, and Helen Adamson as well as a supervisor. And if any of you are interested to hear more about the flora, you can go on the website, the Teesdale Flora Trust website, or this book I can also recommend. And it has a good summary of the geology, geography, the flora, human history, different aspects, and it's very interesting to read. But thank you very much for listening.